Catus, Maximus here. This time a review of the Anbull 1-inch or 25mm electro-hydraulic rebar cutter. This is a free promotional product. Actually, they tried to collaborate with me more than a year ago, and I had made a video about that, and we didn't end up collaborating. And that video is still on my channel, and it'll still be there. But they've kind of changed how they want just 5-star reviews, which was what my issue was. And so this is just a more normal, however I think of it, product. Do appreciate them sending it to me. It's about the average price for this capacity. We'll start getting this open. You know, these steel boxes that these kind of tools come in, I mean, a 1-inch capacity or 25mm capacity hydraulic rebar cutter from a professional brand will be a couple $1,000s or more. A couple random things here. We got our little oil bottle. We do have a few tools that it comes with the manual. Anyway, so this time around they changed it, and I guess kind of feeling bad about the 5-star thing, they sent me a pretty heavy-duty product. They will mention that they did have a pretty thick double-wall cardboard box, but this tool weighs 50 pounds. It's 25 kilograms just for the tool itself. About 60 kilograms or almost, almost 30 kilograms or almost 60 pounds shipping weight. And these steel cases really are like steel shipping boxes, and so it'll totally depend. On this one, it did want to punch out. They didn't use closed cell foam. Even Viva is moving all to closed cell foam, which just prevents it from getting all broken up. So we do have some random tools. I'll say that the Chinese wrenches that come with, just the basic kind of tools that come with, or as, service items, so they tend to be cheap, or actually even getting better, even though this one's a little bent, a little warped. They do have a brand on there, and they are looking a little bit better. That's where really China's been improving a lot in the last few years, is controlling the price increases while the product quality and the manufacturing quality is inevitably going up as they modernize their factories and get better at making things. I also believe that they're sending, like Anbull, there's a lot of different brands of these, that they're just now transitioning to a new generation of these type of cutters, which have aluminum alloy bodies. So they're trying to I think they are being more price competitive on these older ones, and then they're trying to get more promotion for them to get them to sell a few more. There just isn't a lot of videos of these. We do have our cutter blocks here, which is, we'll take a look. These may be a spare set of cutter blocks with bolts. We do have split washers for lock washers. These are supposed to be D2 steel cutters. Very good. Pretty one of the best steels to use for that type of purpose. And these tools, this is not a tool that you're going to be schlepping up on a 30-foot ladder. This is not a tool that you're going to be working 12-hour days, 6 days a week, using it exclusively overhead. And there's some safety concerns, just because when you're cutting big, thick steel, especially like nipping off a short end of the section, it can pop off with quite a bit of force. But that's the deal, is that the newer ones are trying to go with aluminum pump housings just to try to reduce the mass some. But we'll see how it works out. Even when it's the Chinese, like a lot of Harbor Freight's tools, it's some of their early drill presses, some late 80s or the early 90s, are actually pretty darn good drill presses and are well respected. And there's some other products like that where, even though they are getting more modern, it may, their new generation with aluminum housings haven't proven themselves. Like these are extremely common. Whatever manufacturer is making these, you'll recognize the design. So the reason these things are so darn heavy, let me get a little bit of zoom. So the weight is this huge section. I mean, this is no mess around. This is pretty heavy. Just a huge piece of forged steel. This is the pump housing that they're trying to make aluminum. The rear portion of the housing is aluminum and has heat sinks in it because it makes so much heat. And all this is, I mean, this is pretty serious. There is a 2.25 horsepower motor, or 1700 watt motor. This would be, well, it's rated at 110 volts, so they say 1700 watts. It's going to be 1800 watts. You're going to want to have this plugged into a 20 amp circuit because it'll be at the limit of a 15 amp and 10 gauge extension cord if you are using extension cords. That happens to apply this. They make so many different models at different price points. They make these, 16 millimeter, 20 millimeter, just a lot of different increments. Just because, one, they're cheaper, and two, unless you need big cutting capacity, this is one of those situations where I chose the big one because it was a promotional product. But unless you need to cut materials this big in diameter, get the lighter one, because this thing weighs over 50 pounds. So anywhere you have to carry it, that's 25 kilograms. So I digress. 2.25 horsepower brush motor driving I believe a gear-based hydraulic pump to simply push this piston out because it takes a lot of force. Now this can't cut rebar, but it can also cut other stuff. You can cut brass, aluminum. You just have to be careful about thin materials because it can get folded in the jaw and wanted to get dragged in between them, and it can actually bend the piston. So you can't cut sheet metal with it. And you really want to make sure that this adjustment bolt here is set so that the material, when it's cutting, the back end can't do this thing on you and want to fold over. So one of the biggest errors is people kind of set this close. I've got some heavy duty 3/8, but in this, when you adjust this, what you're really supposed to do is have it way out until you barely can get the material in there, almost to where it's pointing in a little bit in the wrong direction. If you have long pieces, you're not going to be able to do that so much. But the deal is you adjust it, either straight or a little bit like this, so that when it comes down the shear, there's a lot of tension here, and it just wants to actually break it off. And that's how it is. It's just two dies that are going past each other and just cleaving the material. It just takes a lot of force when it comes to that inch diameter. I mean, this is certainly a heavy duty unit. It is all cast aluminum. That is just a huge cast aluminum motor housing. For the oddest reason, can you even see this? Yeah, you can. They put like green stickers over the brush caps. I guess to make it look cool, but I think that's, just a little bit cheesy. And oddly enough, you can stand it up on its back, probably just to make it so you can evidence about how much. I have no idea what the tonnage rating is on shearing 1-inch mild steel. This is not for tool steels. You'll just damage the cutters. It is not for high strength chain. You will ruin the tool if you try to cut bolts with it. Although I'm sure you could get away with cutting a few bolts, even some big ones like this. Inevitably the D2 steel is so tough that inevitably you will end up probably causing the jaws to explode. Oh, I digress. Anyway, you can see all those fasteners. All these bolts are grade 12.9 top strength socket head cap screws, and there's 17 of them. There's one right in the middle here. 17, and that's just to hold the two housings that prevent themselves from ripping each other apart. So anyway, and yes, in case you're wondering, the bolts actually, I'm sorry, it's not just 17, it's 19. There are bolts even holding this lower type to provide pressure on the lower section. So they got two of them kind of cross bolted, and then there's our feet for it. You can get a workout moving one of these big cutters around. This is even the biggest one. I think even Weaver now has a 1.25 inch capacity, and those things are like 60 or 70 pounds. They're almost getting as heavy as a normal person can even manipulate. And even this thing, to tell you the truth, if you really had to carry that any distance on a job site, hopefully you have some kind of rubber wheel hand truck or a buddy to help you. I'll say the manual is actually halfway decent. Even gives you procedures for doing the proper oil level check. Might as well give a little demonstration. Even though they say 5/8 or 14 millimeters is the minimum size, I'm not exactly sure. Besides, there's too much. You just have to pay attention when you're cutting smaller bar to make sure it doesn't get tangled up. As I've said so many times before, make sure this bolt's adjusted. And if you're cutting off short pieces, you can actually cut pretty small little bits, such as this little piece, just a little nub. And you can hear it barely makes any sound, but you can actually cut off pretty small little pieces here, and just simply puts enough pressure on there until it snaps. Also, when you're using smaller rod, don't put it down at the bottom. You want to have it centered in the jaws, and I think that's the other issue. Otherwise, if you just pulse the trigger, it's like a cycle, so the piston has to come all the way out before it can retract. And yes, this is actually a concern. Really early, this has a little set screw right here, and they include an Allen wrench for it. This little set screw that I just put that wrench into is a pressure relief. And you want to make sure it's not super tight, but you want to make sure that that screw stays tight. This is one of the machines where you periodically are always checking the fasteners. But if for some reason, maybe you've got some air in the hydraulic oil is too low and it doesn't finish a cut, unfortunately, you can end up in a position where the anvil is stuck halfway out. And so if you do that, that will do the pressure release and allow the anvil to either retract or allow you to use a piece of rebar to pry it back. And as soon as it hits that limit, it retracts automatically. Anyway, it works pretty decently, to tell you the truth. It's interesting how the system works. It's like pretty high flow, and the piston actually moves pretty quickly. So the advertised cutting time is 5 seconds or so. But that isn't, and then they show like their smallest unit has like a 2.5 second cutting time. But they're actually doing themselves a disservice. Cutting the same diameter rod, 1/2 inch rebar, whether you have the smallest unit or this unit, it's going to be about the same amount of time. This takes 5 seconds if you have a 1 inch bar in there. That way it has to do its high pressure mode the whole way through, rather than this where it's able to extend the anvil quickly and then just has to make a small little cut at the end. Like so. I should have had my thermal camera out. What is surprising is how easy and quick it cuts. As this is pinching that piece of steel off, but even a 3/8 or 10 millimeter piece of rebar, the amount of energy it takes to just simply shear a piece of steel of this size, it's a very short period of time, but they warm up. I mean, they're probably 80, these pieces are probably 80 degrees, 90 degrees, not 90, but they're distinctively warm, and they were just simply a simple shearing action. Enough energy is departed from that simple shear to actually cause, an inch long piece of 3/8 steel to raise its temperature a good 10 plus degrees. It's kind of interesting. Now, I would say that 10 millimeter or 3/8 rod is probably about the bare minimum. I don't know if there probably is 5/16 rebar. That's getting 5/16 is getting small enough to where it may not actually fully cut it, and it may just offset it, and you'll have to hand fatigue it. These jaws don't go totally past each other. It actually stops maybe 1/8 of an inch. And I think that's to help just prevent pieces of steel from smearing in between the jaws, and once again preventing the cylinder from getting bent. I did mention the spare jaws. They do come with spare bolts, which is nice. Due to the machining on the piston, there's actually chamfers on the die block and the piston, but the fixed jaw does not have chamfers. And yes, people often forget, but this die can be flipped around, and then the fixed die actually has technically 4 cutting edges, because you can flip it around this way and then you can flip it around this way. And if they're just getting rounded, you can do some grinding work, at least on one edge, because there's a certain spacing, because these blocks are supported by a machined surfaces in here, so you could only grind one edge because you still need the right width for it to seat properly, because the bolts are just sucking it in. They're not taking the linear force that's being borne by the piston in the body. And I'll finish this review off with care instructions. And I think a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, there's certainly plenty of cases where people who are more judicious with their tool maintenance have better experiences even with cheaper tools than people who just have something like this and they throw it in the bed of the pickup and let it slam from side to side. Instead of carrying it down from maybe an upper level of the building, they just toss it out the window and let it fall into the concrete. No, that's a little excessive. But things like checking all the fasteners, I did have to put a little bit more torque on the bolts for the jaws. The bolts for the pump housing are all super tight. If you use these a bunch, especially in the summertime, they will get hot, and you have to be careful. Once this thing, if it gets, I mean, they'll get burning hot, like 150 degrees or hotter. So you want to be aware of that, particularly if you're cutting large diameter material and it has to work hard through the entire cutting process. It'll obviously generate a lot more heat. Other maintenance tips. Well, one is, I think you can find handles from another brand, but that's always feedback I'm going to give to all these Chinese manufacturers, is that they have a hard time. They don't want to deal with, since everything has to come from China for these things, they have a hard time dealing with stocking parts because they see them as a sunk cost, because they're paying to stock parts and have them around to only occasionally make a few dollars off those parts, and the labor to manage them, it's usually actually disprofitable. And that's why so many times they'll just send you a whole new unit. They're already shipping it already, and once they do all their included costs versus whatever their bulk price is on these things, that's the biggest worry, is, of course, the handle. And I give Beaver back, and same thing with Anbull here. If you're going to have, I can understand limiting spare parts, highly limiting, but a couple things you really got to have, say, for a tool like this, is replacement cutters and the handle. Because this thing weighs, once again, 25 kilograms, 50 pounds, over 50 pounds, and if it drops, that handle will not take an impact from a 50-pound tool. It is thick. This handle has no flex. It's pretty good, but nonetheless. Tip: if it doesn't seem to have any cutting power on these, check the oil level. It's really just filled up until it starts to run out of this hole. But one of the things you have to do is run it up and have it partially cut a piece of rebar, so that there's load on the fluid to compress any air that's in there, and you need to partially cut a little piece of rebar there. Once it's in that position, then you double check the oil, but you do want to have the piston extended some before you do that. And if you're a contractor getting one of these who which is totally valid. I really actually approve a lot of these tools, because these are the type of things where, once again, the true industrial grade ones are going to be thousands of dollars, or 4 figures. They're going to be $1,000, $2,000, $3,000. One of these will make you enough money to both pay for itself and pay for a high-end professional one if you're doing that much rebar work or whatever you're doing. Something like this, you could do stainless steel, but the rule of thumb when cutting stainless steel with tools that are, like sheet metal shears and that type of stuff, is 35%. So if this will do 1 inch Rebar, I would say that maybe 3/4 inch or 5/8, you know, somewhere 14, 16 millimeters, 18 millimeters for non-hardened or softened stainless steels you could probably get away with. Of course, brasses and aluminums, no problem with thicker materials. So you can do bar stock. I have some aluminum here. We'll see if the jaws get close enough to shear. It's only about 3/8 of an inch thick, but about 3/4 of an inch tall. If you're cutting bar stock, you put it flat side like this. Don't do it like this. So I just wanted to see how aluminum shears in one of these. So obviously you can shear aluminum, and it's actually pretty cooperative too, just because one, it's a thick cross section, and just because what the tool is really trying to do is just shift it over, and rather than actually bending it, and so it works against the property, the shear strength of the material, and you get enough pressure and it'll just fracture. I should also mention that there is a workaround. If you have something that is too, when it's round objects, it's more difficult to find something. With a round object, you still need something flat to stack behind it to support it in order to give it an equivalent thickness. But like if you had a material this thick, that would be too thin. It would just shift over a little bit and get jammed in the jaws. But if you are cutting stock that is flat, small square stock or rectangular stock, then you can stack it up like this, and then the entire cross section of all the layers kind of acts as one bigger piece, and then you would be able to shear it all off at once. And last but not least, do not try to cut tubing, because it'll just get squashed and jammed. And that's really all there is to it. So I appreciate Anbull sending this to me. I appreciate them actually having the confidence after I made a critical video of a previous collaboration attempt that they came through, maybe even a little bit of bribish, because they sent me, even for a Chinese tool, a pretty expensive, heavy-duty cutter. And for what it is, it's actually decent. And it does what it says it's going to do, and comes with extra jaws. And yes, they are smart enough. This is just a touch over a 1-inch gap right there, so the gaps limit. So, you know, you're not going to be able to drop some 1 1/4 or 1.5 inch rebar and then have it get stuck. They make sure that you can't, you know, do something like that. And besides, you know, regularly checking on the hydraulic fluid, give these a warm up. All of them say give them a little bit of a warm up period, about 30 seconds. And in the manual, it just says to use this stuff, 20 weight. Where does this say 20 weight on it? There it is, 20 weight hydraulic jack oil, or AW46 hydraulic oil. I ended up buying a bunch, although they did have it actually shipped properly, topped off. I was amazed. It was actually pretty nice. But I bought some anyway, although it was like $8 for this darn bottle. Maybe I got taken at O'Reilly's Auto Parts. And I'll leave it at that. And to tell you the truth, I've even inspected the bottom of this thing, and at least on this one, it's actually not leaking at all. So, something else you want to watch for. Anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.